Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Telegraph live event, Glucose Control, the Key to Better Health. So my name's Miranda Levy. I'm a senior commissioning editor here at the Telegraph, and I'm also the author of the book, The Insomnia Diaries, How I Learned to Sleep Again. So over the next hour, I'm delighted to be joined by the author of Glucose Revolution, Jessie Inchauspé. Jessie's going to be explaining the science behind glucose control and providing you with life-changing hacks that you can easily put into your daily routine. So we'll discuss how to flatten your glucose curve while still enjoying the food you love, which is really important, and explore how eating foods in the right order can help you lose weight and feel healthier, as long as some other things which I think are very interesting to explore. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jessie. Jessie's a biochemist. She's big on Instagram. She's at Glucose Goddess. And the great thing is, as always is with science, I think, is turning cutting edge science into easy tips, practical things that you can actually do. They're easy to follow to help you improve your physical and your mental health. Jessie's got a very storied academic career. She studied maths at King's College London, and then she went over to Washington, D.C., where she studied biochemistry. And then you worked in Silicon Valley for 5 years in genetics. So, really interesting background. So, but here today, we're here to talk about glucose and why it's important, how it can help us. So, let's get started. So Jessie, I think it's always really nice when people introduce themselves. So can you just sort of tell us a bit about you, your background, a bit about your personal story, which has brought you here, and then how that led to the research and the stuff we're going to be talking about this evening?
For sure. Thanks for having me, Miranda. It's really fun to have this chat with you. I'm super happy to be here. So, I never planned to dive into glucose. I never really planned on being an expert in glucose. I sort of fell into this space through my own personal health journey that started when I was a teenager. So at the age of 19, I broke my back jumping off a waterfall. My spine shattered. So that was not great. And after that, for many years, I suffered a lot from mental health issues. And I was a bit lost as to, how to understand my body, what I could do to feel better. But I realized at that young age that health is what's most important in the world. If you don't have your health,
Yeah.
it's really difficult to go on and do anything else. So that's why I went and studied biochemistry in the States. And then I went to work in genetics, again, sort of in search of answers. And the moment that changed my life was when I was in Silicon Valley and I was testing out this new device called a continuous glucose monitor. I'm not wearing it now, but you usually wear it on the back of your arm. It's a device that was made for people with diabetes and it measures in real time your blood sugar levels. And I was testing it as a non diabetic. And what I discovered was that glucose spikes, so big, sharp increases in blood sugar levels, were one of the triggers for my mental health episodes, which completely blew me out of the water because for 10 years I had been searching for triggers to these mental health issues I was having. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I had a clue. So, when I made that discovery, I immediately dove into every single glucose related scientific paper I could find. I had like 1,000 tabs open on my internet browser, trying to read every possible thing, make sense of every possible thing about glucose. And I discovered a few things. Number one, I discovered that I was not alone, that 90% of the population, whether they have diabetes or they do not have diabetes, experience glucose spikes every single day. 90%. And most of us don't know this. However, we're very familiar with the symptoms. I also discovered in the research that symptoms of glucose spikes range from cravings to fatigue to hunger to acne, fertility issues, sleep issues, difficult menopause symptoms, all the way to developing conditions like type 2 diabetes. So I was like, oh, wow, glucose is very important for everybody. And then, second, I discovered this cutting edge science that could teach us how to avoid these glucose spikes without going on a diet, without giving up any foods that we love, because I'm a big pasta and chocolate fan, and there was just
Mm.
no way I was going to give those up. But I wanted to avoid these glucose spikes to feel better. And so I synthesized all the research and came up with these sort of 10 principles to flatten our glucose curves.
Mhm.
And then I decided to start sharing this information, with honestly, I started on social media, on Instagram, and then through a book, because it's really important for people to know about this.
I was interested, and one of the things I read in your book is our bodies aren't designed to eat this high sugar, high carb diet. So, is this becoming an increasingly modern problem that people have these issues?
Yes. So the fact that 90% of people have these big glucose spikes every day is not normal, right? It's really very much a function of the sort of modern food landscape that we
Mm.
roam in. Most supermarket products are really high in starches and sugars, and glucose comes from exactly those two things, starchy or sweet foods. And so we
Mm.
eat way more of these than we used to. And as a result, we get glucose spikes every day.
Yeah, so what does a, I mean, bit of science, what does a glucose spike actually do? What happens in your body?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, a glucose spike is when after you eat something, the concentration of blood sugar in your blood goes up very rapidly. Okay, so we're talking like 1.5 millimole per liter increase for those of you watching who are familiar with the numbers. And so, what happens in our body when these glucose spikes take place? So, there's two main mechanisms that happen. Number one, we age faster. And number two, our body increases its inflammation levels. So, the aging piece I can go into a little bit, it's quite interesting. When there's a lot of glucose molecules in your body, they start running around like kids on a playground and they just bump into anything they find. And when a glucose molecule bumps into another molecule, it damages that other molecule. It says what's called glycation. It glycates the other molecule. And
Mm.
glycation is essentially the same thing as aging. And it's also the same thing as cooking. So when you put a chicken in the oven and it goes from being pink to being brown, it's because it's gone through glycation. And inside
Okay.
your body, yeah, inside your body, from the moment you're born, you slowly cook. And then, Miranda, when you're fully cooked, you die. I know, it's wild.
Oh, I don't know why I'm
Glycation,
smiling.
because it's something that most of us don't
Yeah,
know, but it's very important to
yeah.
understand. And so the more glucose spikes you have, the faster things glycate. The faster you
Mm.
age, the faster you cook. And this shows on your skin with wrinkles, but also inside, your organs slowly age. So that's the first process that happens with every glucose spike. Now, the second process has to do with your mitochondria. So inside each of your cells, there's these little mitochondria, and their job is to turn glucose into energy. So when a glucose spike happens, glucose rushes to all of your mitochondria because that's where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be turned into energy. Unfortunately, your mitochondria, they don't want too much glucose. And so when a big influx comes in, they go on strike. And I'm French, so I know the concept very well. So your
Oh,
mitochondria,
so do we. Mm.
true, true,
Especially on
true.
the trains. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's very
Mm.
true. So your
Mhm.
mitochondria go on strike and they can no longer turn glucose into energy. They just shut down and they break down. And that increases inflammation and stress in the body. So you have those two mechanisms. And then finally, in response to this, because your body knows that a lot of glucose is not good, so your body actually has a mechanism to try to bring those glucose levels down so they don't make too much damage. And to do that, your body sends out insulin. Insulin is a very important hormone that you might have heard about in the context of diabetes. Insulin grabs glucose and stores it away in your muscles, in your liver, and in your fat cells. But over time, too much insulin contributes to the development of type 2 diabetes. So, anyway, you have these three things: aging, inflammation, insulin, which are the reason why glucose spikes have such a big impact on our physical and mental well-being. Those are the biochemical underlyings.
But the good news, which is what we really want to concentrate on for the rest of this evening, is that while we're being caramelized, there are still actually some things, there's still actually some things we can do to slow this down and maybe even reverse some things. So that's
Yes.
what I'd like to come on to now. Now, the big thing, I love this. This made me feel really good. The benefits of flattening your glucose spike will help you lose weight. You'll have fewer cravings, and there's no need to cut calories. And I
Hmm.
love, and I think this is what we should now talk about, is that you don't change what you eat, but you change how you eat it, which I think is
Yeah.
great. So it's not a whole load of denial, it's just some little tweaks to your current routine. Um, now, this is really interesting, and we've got a number of points that you talk about in your book. So I think we should start talking about breakfast, which is where we generally start. So can you tell us what we need to do at breakfast time?
Absolutely. So to give people a bit of context, these principles that I've summarized, they all come from over 300 scientific papers that are very recent. So the reason they're so cool and interesting, and the reason we now know that we don't have to change what we're eating specifically, but we have some other hacks we can put in place to reduce the glucose spikes, is thanks to all this cool science coming up around the world. So just shout out to the scientists doing all this cool research. I'm just the messenger. So breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day for your glucose levels. And in the science, what the researchers have discovered is that if your breakfast creates a big glucose spike, you're going to be hungrier faster, you're going to have more cravings for the rest of the day, your energy is not going to be as steady for the rest of the day, and you won't sleep as well at night. And also, you're contributing to all those other conditions that we mentioned. So, the best thing to avoid a glucose spike at breakfast is to eat a savory breakfast instead of a sweet one. So, put simply, avoid anything sweet for breakfast except whole fruit. Whole fruit is okay. You can definitely eat starches. So, bread is fine, oats are fine, etc., if you pair them with proteins, fats, and fiber. So I think we have a graph here that we can show where I compare, and this is from my own glucose data coming from my glucose monitor. I compare toast with jam to toast with almond butter. So the toast with jam, that's a sweet breakfast. And it spikes my glucose levels and then they come crashing down, at which point I'm probably pretty hungry again. If I replace the jam with something like a nut butter that's unsweetened, no spike, steady glucose levels, less inflammation, less aging, less creation of cravings. So this hack is really powerful because if you get your breakfast to keep your glucose levels steady, you will really feel a very big difference throughout the whole day. And if
Can
you
I
if you love sweets, yeah.
can I just ask, why is almond butter? Because not everybody has almond butter in their cupboards. Why is that better than just having regular butter? What's the reason?
This is a good question. So regular butter is just fat. Nut butter, so peanut butter could work as well as long as it doesn't have sugar in it. It also contains protein. So that way you're getting protein and fat. And protein in the morning is really wonderful and important to keep your glucose levels steady.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that people often have for breakfast is, the traditional fruit juice and muesli. So that, unfortunately, creates a very big glucose spike. We've been told, Miranda, that eating sweet foods for breakfast is important because it's going to
Yeah,
give us energy.
yeah, totally.
The thing is, it gives us pleasure in our brain, but it
Mm.
doesn't give us, it's not the best way to get energy. Because if you have a big glucose spike, your body's going to usher the glucose away and store it away, and it's not going to be as available for your cells. So in the studies, they show that, a breakfast with a big glucose spike actually leads to less available energy for your body.
You see,
So
I find
anyway,
that really I find that really interesting because we've been sold all these healthy mueslis and healthy, and actually
yeah,
it's not really. So if people are on the run, if they're in a hurry, I mean, not everyone has time to smash an avocado, or
yeah,
maybe
of
they do. I
course.
mean, are there things you can prepare the night before? Are there ways you just say you're on the run out to work or see the
Yeah.
grandchildren or something? Yeah.
So some quick and easy ones are you can soft boil some eggs in a batch, like on the weekend, for example, and just grab one out the door. You can grab a piece of bread with like a slice of ham on it,
Yeah.
spread a little bit of butter, some ham, boom, out the door. That's a savory breakfast. That's an easy
Hmm.
one. Any leftovers from dinner the night before.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point where I can eat fish and carrots for breakfast. It doesn't bother me because I just treat
Really?
it like another, yeah, yeah, because you just treat it
You
like
get
another
used to it.
savory
You
meal.
get used to it, dear. That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. So anything
I mean,
savory is kind of the key. You want to avoid, the fruit juices and the muesli and the oats with
mm,
honey, etc. The best time to eat something sweet is for dessert, after lunch or after dinner. But in the morning, truly try it. Switch to a savory breakfast. You will
yeah,
see that your energy levels are going to change completely.
no, I mean that's fascinating. Now the next thing which really interested me is food order. Now you say here
Mhm.
that if you eat things in the right order, and I'm going to let you explain what that is, you can reduce your glucose spikes by 73%. I mean, that's
Yeah,
amazing, isn't it? Just by
up to
changing the order
73%.
in which you eat things. So, will you please go into that for us?
Absolutely. And so this is really interesting science. And in the research, we see that you don't actually have to change what you're eating, but if you eat the constituents of a meal in a specific order, as you mentioned, you can reduce the glucose spike by up to 75%. We're 75%, and you're not changing what you're eating. So you're helping your health and you're
Mm,
not changing what you're eating. I mean, to me,
yeah,
that's so amazing. I
mm,
know. And so the right order is the following: vegetables first, then proteins and fats, then starches and sugars. So we have an example here, and I'm just going to walk through it. So here we have, let's look at the top graph: mango, rice, tomato, and shrimp ceviche. In the top graph, we're eating them in the wrong order. So the sweet and starchy foods first, then the vegetables and the protein. In the bottom graph, we do the right order. So always start with your vegetables and your proteins. So in this case, they're mixed, which is also fine. Tomato and shrimp ceviche. And then you have the starches and the sweets. It's practical because we usually always have the sweets for dessert. I mean, that's usually how it goes. So that one is a pretty easy one. But if you focus on starting with your vegetables and your proteins before your starches, you will see, I mean, look at this difference. There's a huge difference in what your body's going to have to deal with. And if you eat your food in the right order, you're going to create less inflammation, slower aging. You're not going to exacerbate symptoms from any chronic conditions you might be harboring. You're not going to create the cravings roller coaster. Your energy levels are going to be steadier. It really makes a massive difference. And this is often one of the hacks that people start with because it's so easy.
so do you have to wait? Like, do you eat your broccoli, then you have to wait 10 minutes, then you eat, the chicken, or is it literally you eat it, then you eat it, then you eat it, and your body can?
You literally do not have to wait. In the scientific settings, they tested different waiting times, but in practice, you don't have to wait. I never wait. Like I just,
Mm,
no way. I just eat the
mm,
veggies first. And if I'm faced with a meal where I didn't plan any vegetables, what I do is I think about, okay, what's a little veggie based thing that I can grab to get some of that protective fiber. Because that's why this hack works. It's because of the fiber in the vegetables that coat your upper small intestine and prevent your body from absorbing too much glucose coming down afterwards. And this only works if you eat the vegetables first. So, example, you're at home, you made a pasta dish with chicken and you're like, oh, I need some veggies. So, what can you grab? You can grab some baby carrots and some hummus. You can grab a half cucumber. You can grab a few salad leaves, throw some nuts in there. Like, you can make the quickest little veggie starter that you want. And it's going to have a big impact on how your body processes that meal.
that's so interesting. And this leads actually nicely the green starter. So can you tell me us more about having? Does it have to be salad, or can it be any kind of green vegetable before? Is it every meal, or is it explain that to us a bit more, please.
Yeah. So these principles you can use whenever they're easy to use. So, for example, when I have breakfast, I don't make myself a veggie starter for breakfast. Like, it's just not the time where it's easy. The vegetable
Sure.
starter hack is most useful before lunch and dinner, obviously, and it can be any type of vegetable. So, You can, of course, make a green salad. You can have some leftover roasted cauliflower from the night before. You can chop some raw tomatoes, some carrots, cooked, raw, whatever you want. You can even have a soup if you want, if it has some vegetable chunks in it. And that's also helpful. But always think, okay, if I'm having a meal, start the meal with veggies because the fiber in the veggies is going to prevent that glucose spike. And that's the most important thing we're trying to do here. We're trying to help our body not have to deal with a glucose spike.
Actually, Robin has sent an interesting question, which doesn't
Yeah.
exactly link to what we were talking about, but it was something I thought about earlier when we were
Mm.
talking about breakfast. Um, does intermittent fasting help with glucose control?
It's a very good question. So, intermittent fasting is up to you and your body and how it feels for you. There's a wide spectrum of what intermittent fasting actually is. We all intermittently fast when we're sleeping. So, we fast for 6 to 9 hours or however long we sleep. And that's great. And our body likes having that break. Then, if you decide that you want to extend it and do like a 16-hour fast or a 24-hour fast or whatever, it is helpful only if it doesn't feel like too much of a stressor to the body. For women, especially of reproductive age, it's important to not fast too much and too often because it can throw your hormones off balance.
That's
So keep in
interesting.
mind that fasting for a long time is a stressor on the body. Like exercise, like cold showers, they're good stressors, but they're still stressors. So personally, I will do long fasts if I'm on vacation and I'm not stressed and it's easy to not eat. If I'm, very busy and going about and doing a bunch of stuff, I tend to have breakfast so I don't add that extra layer of stress. So
Mm,
when it comes to glucose levels, yes, it is best to go longer periods of time without eating. But what's even more important for glucose is not so much how long you're fasting for, but actually how you break the fast. What is the first thing you eat at the end of the fast? Because when you're fasted, your body is empty. Anything you put
mm,
into it goes straight to your bloodstream. So
mm.
if you eat, for example, a cookie after a 24-hour fast, you're going to see a much bigger glucose spike from that cookie than if you had it for dessert after a regular lunch. Okay, so be
Yeah,
mindful of that.
that makes a lot of sense. Now,
Yeah.
talking about cookies and snacks, snacks are not something that you think that highly of, are they?
Oh, snacks are fine. It's better to
Oh,
try
snacks are okay.
to Snacks are okay. I mean, it's better to try to consolidate your food into 3 meals a day. The science
Yeah.
shows us that it's best to have 3 meals instead of 3 meals and snacks. But then, if you're going to snack, try again to have something savory as a snack. Some cheese, some protein, some nuts, yogurt, things like that. Because if we eat something sweet, again, on an empty stomach, we're going to create a glucose spike. And then
Mm,
that glucose spike is going to start a cravings roller coaster.
yeah.
And this is the roller coaster that most of us are on. And it usually starts with breakfast, actually. Sweet breakfast, spike. And then we crash and we want more sugar. Sugar calls sugar. And so you're on this roller coaster all day and you feel sort of controlled by your cravings. You feel like you have to have something sweet. And actually, that's your brain responding to the glucose roller coaster. But if you steady your glucose curves and you avoid the spikes, those cravings don't happen anymore, and it's a whole new world. It's a very nice experience to not be on that roller coaster anymore.
That definitely makes sense. Now, the other thing you talk about is vinegar, a specific type of vinegar
Yeah,
incorporated into your diet through a drink. So tell us
yeah.
about
So
that.
so I really like this slide, especially for the British audience. So you see in the top slide French fries on their own, and then the bottom slide French fries and vinegar. So you're like, what is going on here? Okay, so vinegar contains a molecule called acetic acid. And acetic acid is actually quite magical. And the science on this topic is really remarkable. It can sound a bit like a sort of weird trend or fad, but it really is not. There are many double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials showing the effect of vinegar on our glucose levels. There are many cultures around the world that have been using vinegar for millennia as a health drink, but now we understand what's actually going on. So this is the hack. Before your meals, have a tablespoon of vinegar in a tall glass of water, so probably bigger than this. And it can be any type of vinegar, except the very syrupy, balsamic glaze stuff that's full of sugar. But it can be
Oh,
apple cider vinegar. Yeah, it can be apple cider vinegar. It can be white wine vinegar, cherry vinegar, whatever you want. And if you have this drink before a meal, you can cut the glucose spike of that meal by up to 30% without doing anything else. And you don't actually have to drink it. You can also drizzle it on your food, hence this experiment with the French fries and the vinegar. And you can also drizzle it on this vegetable starter that I mentioned. So you have two hacks in one. You have the veggie starter with the protective fiber, and then the acetic acid and the vinegar on top that allows you to reduce the glucose spike of the meal.
so
So, really cool hack.
sorry, how many times a day do you recommend doing this then?
It's really up to you. So in the studies, they test anything from once a day to 3 times a day. It's up to you and what feels good for your body. I have gotten so used to the taste that even this has vinegar in it because I just drink every time I drink water, I put a bit of vinegar in it. It's become like my little cocktail. But it's up to you. If you're trying to really reduce your glucose spikes, I would say you can do it, 2, 3 times a day before every meal. There are no side effects to drinking vinegar. It's completely safe. You want to make sure you dilute it in water so that it doesn't hurt your teeth's enamel. But if it's
Right.
diluted in water, like you're completely fine. And again, in the studies, they see impact even if you just do it once a day. So yeah, it's a really cool one.
Um, I think this is a very cute little phrase, which I would love you
Oh,
to recommend. Another one of your hacks is to put clothes on your carbs. So
yes.
that's not potatoes, is it something else?
Oh, that's so sweet. So carbs are things that turn to glucose when we digest them. And those are starches and sugars. So starches are, for example, chips, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, etc. And sugars are, well, anything sweet. So any desserts, cookies, ice cream, fruit juice, cereal, muesli, etc. So anytime you have something starchy or something sweet, you sort of have two options. You can either eat them on their own, which I call naked carbs, or, which is the right thing to do, put some clothing on them. And the clothing is protein, fat, or fiber. So, to give you an example, if you're making some pasta for yourself for dinner, if you eat the pasta alone, that would be naked carbs, that would be naked starches. In order to put clothing on the pasta, maybe add some spinach in there, maybe a bit of olive oil, a little bit of cheese, maybe like, I don't know, a few pieces of like leftover chicken from the night before. Make yourself a dish that is not just pure carbs. And by doing this, you reduce the glucose spike from the meal. Because instead of the meal being pure carbs, so turning straight to glucose and poof going into your bloodstream, there are other nutrients in there that are going to slow down digestion and prevent such a big spike. Another of my favorite examples is chocolate cake. I'm a big chocolate cake person. And I used to just eat chocolate cake on its own. And now I put clothing on it. I have it with some Greek yogurt. So or some, cream would work as well. Ploof, big dollop. That way it's not just the sugar, you also have some protein and some fat from the yogurt.
You see, I find that really interesting because you might think adding cream to chocolate cake is bad because you are taking in more calories, but does it, is that not the case then? Or,
That's a really good question, actually. So, what about calories? Because putting clothing on your carbs is adding calories. Whether
right.
you're adding, Greek yogurt or you're adding like chicken and cheese, you're adding calories.
Mm.
So, we have to remind ourselves that weight loss, weight gain doesn't happen in a vacuum at every meal. Like, whether you're going to lose weight or put on weight is a matter of what happens in a whole day, in a week, in a whole month. By putting clothing on your carbs, yes, you're adding calories, but you're also reducing the glucose spikes of your day. So you're reducing cravings, you're reducing hunger, you're going to sleep better, you're going to have more energy, so you're going to make much better choices. It's sort of like it's a little building block that leads to you being in a place where weight loss becomes much easier. There are good calories to add.
I'm going to ask a question from Moira, who I think talks for a lot of us, who says, well, why do I crave sweet foods in the first place? I mean, I think you've sort of covered it a bit with the glucose roller coaster, but why is it that that's what we want?
It
A bar
doesn't
of
make sense,
chocolate.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
It's because, so it actually is an evolutionary thing. So back in the day, like prehistoric times, finding food was important. It was one of our main activities. And the taste of sweetness signaled two things about food. It signaled that the food was safe because there's no poisonous and sweet food. And two, it
Wow,
signaled, yeah, and it
that's really,
signaled that the
yeah,
food had a lot of calories in it, a lot of available energy. So if we found a sweet food, it was a very good idea to eat it as quickly as possible before anybody else got to it. So our brains are hardwired to seek out the sweet food.
that's so
And when we eat
interesting.
something sweet, it releases dopamine. And this is the
Mm,
same chemical that's released when we play, like when we go gambling, when we have sex, when we take illegal drugs. It's all connected to this reward pathway and it makes us feel good. There's this study they did where they knocked out mice's ability to taste. So the mice could not taste anything. They gave them two options, regular water or sugar water. And they just put the mice in a cage with these two bottles. What they found was that the first minute, the mice drank from either bottle kind of randomly because they couldn't taste the difference. However, when the scientists came back 12 hours later, the mice were exclusively drinking from the sugar water, even though they couldn't taste the sugar. So, why is that? Because the mice had learned that that water made them feel good. They learned that it gave them pleasure. So, truly, our entire body is just wired to receive pleasure when we eat something sweet.
it's a
So,
bit of a shame,
unfortunately,
really.
I
It's a
know,
shame we weren't wired to like celery
I
or
know.
broccoli.
I think, where I really think the shame is the fact that the food industry has taken this information to create addictive food products. That's really the problem. Because
Yeah.
now we're surrounded by chocolate bars and ice creams and cookies. They're cheap, they're delicious, they're
Mm,
everywhere. So obviously, we have to be a bit conscious of what's happening and say, okay, I love sweet stuff. How do I eat it in a way that doesn't create this roller coaster and make me crave more sweet stuff? That's the
totally.
key. The pleasure without the addiction.
Very good. Now, one thing we haven't yet mentioned and is a very important part of all of this, and readers are asking about as well, is exercise, right?
Yes.
So, how this
Yes.
fits in with everything, when we should exercise, perhaps what kind of exercise,
Yeah.
as part of this kind of holistic way of, flattening the glucose curve. So, tell us, please, what you think about that.
Of course. So exercise anytime is good for us, right? So whatever you do, whenever you do it, that's great. It's better than not doing it at all. There is one specific thing you can do that will help you flatten your glucose curves and has to do with exercise. And that is after your meals, using your muscles for 10 minutes. So within an hour after the end of a meal, get up and for 10 minutes, do some sort of activity. We're not talking going to the gym and doing anything extreme. I'm talking going for a walk, folding your laundry, cleaning your apartment, dancing to your favorite songs, doing some tricep dips on the edge of the couch while you're watching a movie, like
Uh-huh.
whatever. Use your muscles for 10 minutes after each meal because your muscles to contract, they need energy. And the first place they're going to look for energy is in your bloodstream. They're going to look for that glucose. So if you use your muscles after a meal, you're going to curb the glucose spike of that meal. And this is specifically if effective for people who suffer from, the food coma. So if after a meal you feel really, really tired, the 10 minutes of movement really help counteract that. It's very
Oh,
powerful.
that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, I have a question as well that leads on to a question from Gillian. But the
Yeah.
glucose monitor that you've been wearing,
Yeah.
is this something you recommend to people? Is it easy to do? What do you feel about that?
So I think currently with the current products on the market, the data is quite difficult to understand if you're not being followed by a medical professional like a doctor or something. So if you don't have any medical supervision and you want to try it out, I mean, you can, but I still think it's pretty early in the space for me to be
Hmm.
comfortable saying like, yes, you're going to understand it. It's not going to stress you out to try to understand the data. Like it's a medical device. It's made for people with
Sure.
diabetes. So I think if you wait a little bit, I have good intel that the products will get better at some point soon, and then it'll be easier for people to interpret the data, you know. But it can be a bit tricky. I get many messages from people every day asking me like, "What does this number mean? Is it too high? Is it too low?" Like the data can be a bit
Oh,
overwhelming.
and you
Yeah,
can become obsessed by it maybe, and you don't want it to be something that takes over your life, right? The
yeah,
pursuit of
exactly.
perfect numbers.
If you're
Yeah.
somebody who has a tendency to like become obsessed with like the number on your scale or something like that, like definitely not a good idea, because the numbers on a glucose monitor, they change like every minute, so you're
Right.
constantly looking at what is the shape of this or that. By using the principles I share, you can already flatten your glucose curves and heal a lot of stuff without having to wear a device yourself. And that's sort of the work I did. Like I wore my device and then I extracted all the data to illustrate the science. Like I've done a lot of the hard work, so you don't have to wear a glucose monitor yourself.
So do you think a lot of it you can is like how you feel? That if you have more energy, if you're getting like less slumps, if you're not feeling hangry,
Yeah,
you know the phrase hangry when
yeah,
you're so
of
hungry. I
course.
mean, I get this. This is what I have. If I miss a meal, God help anyone who's around me. But do you think the way to see the success is how, because obviously there are long-term effects, right, with keeping you healthy, but surely there are effects you can feel almost immediately, or how long does it take before you can feel it?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So you will feel, when you learn these principles and you apply them, you'll feel within 24 hours that you're not as hungry anymore and your cravings are
Mm.
dissipating and you have more energy. And I feel like that's even a better indicator of the progress you're making than the particular shape of the curve on your app, like feeling
Hmm.
better. That's the
Yeah,
best piece of information you can have about the fact that you're making progress.
and it's kind of inspiration to continue, isn't it? Kind of
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
virtuous cycle.
yeah,
Interesting
and it's
question
easy.
from a
I
reader
was just gonna
who's
say,
asking
go ahead, go
about
ahead.
how does glucose play a part in the diet of a menopausal or postmenopausal woman? I think that's very interesting.
Very interesting. So the science is still pretty young on the topic, but the research studies that do exist show us that the more glucose spikes you have in your diet, the more you're going to feel symptoms of menopause. So hot flushes and insomnia being the main ones. So we know that whatever's going on in your body that is bothering you, whether it's difficult menopause, whether it's acne, psoriasis, infertility, poor sleep, chronic fatigue, like all of the systems in your body are affected by glucose spikes. I sort of I like using this image of your body as a plane, and
Hmm.
you're in the cockpit and you're trying to keep your plane, flying in the air, aka you're trying to keep yourself feeling good and healthy. But the problem, Miranda, is you're in the cockpit and you have no idea how a plane works. So you're just flying
Mm.
blind, like, I don't know what to do to, be healthier and feel better, but I'm going to try. If you learn about this one lever in your cockpit, which is your glucose levels, you can essentially fly your plane okay. Because when you understand your glucose, most systems in your body get better, whether it's menopause symptoms that improve, whether it's your sleep, whether it's your type 2 diabetes that starts going into remission. Like it affects everything. It's the core. It's the most important place to start to improve your health.
So I want to come back to diabetes in a minute, actually. But the first question, I mean, you may have answered this already, but as you get older, so we're talking about 70s, 80s, and beyond,
Yeah.
are there any things that you should do more of, or less of, or differently than, say, someone in
Mm.
their 30s or 40s?
That's a very good question. I don't think so, to be perfectly honest, because glucose spikes affect us at any age. And
Hmm.
when you're, for example, in your 20s, you might not yet have developed a specific chronic condition, but if you set up your body in a nice way, you're going to be able to prevent the onset of many conditions. And then once you're in your 70s, you want to keep feeling good, you want to live for a super long, healthy life. And then understanding your glucose spikes is going to help you do that. So it's just really important at any age. And one space where I'm actually really interested in looking into is with kids, and what parents, what information parents need about kids' diets and how glucose spikes affect kids. That's not something I know yet, but I'm going to research it because it seems like it's important at any age.
So I'm going to now pop over to more readers' questions, if that's all right
Yeah,
with
of
everybody. Those
course.
questions. So Puran has asked, can you reverse type 2 diabetes?
Yes. Well, you can put it in remission. You can put it
What
in
does that
remission. So, reverse would mean that any damage that's been done to your organs, notably your pancreas, for example, would be completely, canceled out, and your pancreas would come
mean?
back to its original state. That
Yeah,
depends on the state of your type 2 diabetes, but remission, which means that you no longer are technically diabetic, so your glucose levels are back to a normal range? Yes, absolutely. So, in most cases, type 2 diabetes is a condition of too much insulin in the body. And too much insulin, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a consequence of too many glucose spikes. So, in the studies, and I mentioned many of these studies in my book, researchers put people on a low glucose spike diet, and their fasting glucose levels start coming down because they no longer have all these spikes. And then many of them have readings that are no longer diabetic. So it's very clear from the literature that the vast majority of type 2 diabetes, of people with type 2 diabetes, if they learn about these principles, they're going to be able to get their fasting glucose levels down.
which is amazing.
It's amazing. And
It's
if
like,
you if you are somebody with type 2 diabetes, and definitely speak with your doctor about these hacks and bring the book to them. And I have many doctors who use my research and my visuals in their practice with their patients to sort of teach them these principles so they can manage their diabetes better, maybe avoid going on medication, maybe reduce medication. So it's really cool to collaborate with all these amazing medical professionals. It's my honor.
so here's a good question, and it's one that I is particularly relevant to me after a tough
Tell me.
day. Where does
Mm.
wine fit into the eating schedule? Or a gin and tonic or a beer? I mean, clearly that there is a lot of sugar in alcohol, right? So is it
What's
what's
the
the
deal?
suggestion there?
What's the
Yeah,
deal? So interestingly, there are actually some alcohols that are fine for your glucose levels, and that includes wine. That
really.
includes, yeah, so sparkling wine, champagne, red, white, rosé, whatever. That also includes hard alcohols. So if you want gin, vodka, rum, tequila, etc., they actually don't spike our glucose levels. But what you want to avoid is mixing them with sweet things. So you want to avoid the tonic and instead go for soda and lime. That's better. In terms of beers, it's kind of split. The sour beers seem to be better. But generally, like, you can get away with drinking alcohol without spiking your glucose levels. However, just keep in mind that even though wine, for example, does not spike your glucose levels, it still is not very good for the body. And, don't abuse it. It's not because it keeps your glucose levels steady that it's
And
healthy.
what alcohol always also does is send you to the fridge.
Oh, yeah, nachos
That's
for
when
me.
the Haagen-Dazs come out. So, from another
Yes.
point of view, it's maybe not a good idea to do too
Because you have to
much.
think about the whole journey. It's not just that one drink. It's then what are you gonna do for the rest of the night?
Yeah, here's a question from Felicia. Would your advice be tailored to expectant mothers? I mean, I'm imagining that while you're
Hmm.
pregnant, you may have to consider some other things.
That's a good question. So definitely speak with your doctor. For example, vinegar, if it's unpasteurized, like most apple cider vinegars are, you should probably not have it. But traditional vinegars are usually totally fine. Other than that, yeah, food orders, savory breakfast, completely okay. I hear many testimonials of people who were diagnosed with gestational diabetes who've been able to not go on medication and keep their glucose levels steady while using these principles. So yes, but in case of doubt, always, speak to your doctor for sure.
Just going back to the vinegar, actually, somebody has asked, and I think it's a really good question. What's the ratio of vinegar to water? Now, you did say this earlier, but can you
I will
repeat it?
repeat. So it's
Yeah.
1 tablespoon of vinegar in a tall
Yeah.
glass of water. That is the ratio in the research studies. Now,
Okay.
if you're just starting out, put a little drop, like a little drop of vinegar, and taste it and see if you can handle it. You don't have to go full tablespoon right away. It's an acquired taste. But
Mhm.
honestly, at this point, what I do is I just don't even measure anymore. I just, I have this water bottle that I carry with me all day, and I just like pour some vinegar in it. But technically, it's 1 tablespoon in a tall glass of water before meals. That is the scientifically proven amount.
Okay, that's good. I've had another question here from Simon. He's
Hi,
asked about
Simon.
travelling. What do you take in your hand luggage if you're on like a long haul flight or a long road trip, or maybe you can't choose the foods that you're given.
Yeah.
What do you do then? What would you suggest?
So for me, the biggest thing I want to avoid when I'm traveling is getting on that cravings roller coaster. So I always, before I leave the house, whether I'm going to
Mhm.
go on a road trip, take a train, take a plane, I have a very large protein focused savory breakfast. Generally an omelet with like 3 eggs, feta cheese, cherry tomatoes, some, hot sauce. Like I just go full savory, full protein. That keeps me full. Really important. Then, of course, when you're traveling, you can be very bored, so you want to eat stuff when you're bored. Totally normal. Best things to buy at an airport are nuts at the newspaper stand. Not very exciting, but won't spike your glucose levels. You can
Mhm.
buy, cheese, stuff like that. And if you're going to have something sweet, for example, you really want, a candy bar or some chocolate, again, try to use the movement hack. So if you're really going to have something sweet, try then to go and do some squats in the airport toilet or go for a walk when you're at the gas station. Use your muscles to help you have the pleasure without having the roller coaster starting.
Mhm. Ash is asking, and this is a good point that also occurred to me earlier. Instead of drinking vinegar, can you have kimchi or sauerkraut, or the foods that people are talking a lot that help the microbiome? Is that kind of
Yeah.
complementary? Yeah.
So there are different mechanisms, but the foods that help the microbiome are very important. And Tim Spector is a professor at King's, and he does a lot of research
Yeah.
on the microbiome. Very, very cool stuff. So definitely also a very important area of health to think about. In terms
Mhm.
of glucose levels, having kimchi or sauerkraut at the beginning of a meal is also great because they contain fiber, which is
Mhm.
protective for the rest of the meal, and a little bit of vinegar. But they don't contain enough vinegar to have the same effect as the vinegar drink.
Oh, okay, that's
But
interesting.
it's better to have kimchi than to have no vegetable starter and no vinegar, So pick and choose.
Yeah. I have another interesting question here from BG. We've moved to oat milk because we've given
Mm.
up milk, and now which she's asking, which milk alternatives would you recommend? I mean, is there like a hierarchy of milk that's better or worse, would you say, or is there no difference
Yes,
really?
yes. So unfortunately, and I know this breaks many hearts, oat milk is not a good option for glucose levels because oat milk is made of oats and oats are starch. And so oat milk makes a big glucose spike in most people. So if you
That's very
switch to oat milk, yes, if you switch to oat milk for health reasons, I would highly recommend switching back to, whole pasture raised dairy, full fat milk. That's my go to. It contains good amounts of fat, good amounts of protein. You can also go to things like almond milk, but then almond milk, environmentally is kind of a disaster because it takes so much water to grow almonds. So there's no perfect solution, but I just went back to the regular dairy because the other alternatives had too many downsides, glucose wise or environmentally.
I'm interested that you have full fat dairy. Do you think there's
Yeah.
limited benefits to semi-skimmed or skim milks?
I like full fat because with the fat and the protein in it, it actually keeps me full for longer. And I actually have a very cool test on my Instagram where I compared a cup of full fat versus a cup of skim milk. And the skim
Mm.
milk actually creates a small glucose spike because milk contains lactose, which is sugar, a little bit of
Yeah.
naturally occurring sugar, which is normal. But if you remove the fat from the milk, it's no longer there to reduce the spike. So skim milk actually makes a little spike, whereas full fat milk does not.
So this is one switch that I'm going to make tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm going
do
to
it.
go back to full fat milk, which I never thought I'd
Yeah,
hear myself saying. That's really
there you
interesting.
go. And you'll
So I
probably
think
feel
we're
full for
finishing.
longer.
Sorry, I think we're finishing in a couple of minutes. Oh no, we've got a bit longer than I thought. So I'm going to ask you some more questions. But before I do,
Yeah.
is there anything that you haven't that you haven't said that's in your book that you think it's really important that readers know about? Um,
I think what's very important for people to know, and something that was a big discovery of mine and that really changed my life, is that most of the symptoms that we feel every day, whether they're mental health symptoms, energy symptoms, skin symptoms, organ symptoms, chronic conditions, cravings, they're usually your body trying to speak to you to tell you your glucose is dysregulated.
mhm,
90% of us have these glucose spikes every day. And most of the symptoms we feel are just simply our body trying to communicate this to us. For me, my mental health episodes were literally just my body being like, Jessie, you're having a glucose spike right now. You know,
yeah,
if we feel cravings, if we feel hungry every 90 minutes, if our energy crashes throughout the day, that's just simply our body being like, yo, your glucose levels are just completely out of balance here. You need to do something. So instead of feeling like we need to medicate, suppress, feel guilty about these symptoms, we can switch a bit our view of them and be like, oh, they're information. Let me now, take that in and try to solve the underlying issue.
sure. An anonymous reader, I don't know why they're anonymous, is there any evidence that glucose metabolism varies with the time of day? For example, is it better to eat a main meal at lunchtime rather than the evening? Which I think is a very good question.
It is a very good question. So it appears that in the morning, your metabolism is better at dealing with glucose spikes. The more we get into evening times, the less well your body is able to deal with the glucose spikes. So it is best to eat earlier in the day rather than later. And that kind of aligns with a lot of the advice we hear, don't have dinner too late, like try to stop eating 3 hours before going to bed. I think that's really helpful. Yeah.
Mhm.
But
And when,
also, I would also mention, Miranda, is that not just time of day, but time of month. So for women, we know that if you have your period, the week before your period, you will have much bigger glucose spikes from the same foods, just because your hormonal system is shifting. So
oh,
the
that's
regular foods, mhm. So the regular foods that you eat will create bigger spikes in your body the week before your period, and therefore they're more likely to also create cravings, which is one of the reasons we get cravings the week before our period. And also another reason to use the hacks then to try to counteract that.
what about things like tea and coffee? Is there any, do they
Yeah.
come into this at all? Is there a limit or a type of hot drink you should avoid?
So tea is completely fine, no problem. Of course, if you add sugar or honey to it, you're going to see a glucose spike. But just regular tea with milk, no problem. Coffee is very interesting. It seems to differ person to person. Some people have no response to coffee, flat glucose. Other people get a glucose spike. And I think it depends on your metabolism and whether coffee makes you like jittery and anxious. If coffee makes you jittery and anxious, it's possible that it actually starts a stress response in your body. And stress can also create glucose spikes. So that might be one of the mechanisms. But generally, coffee and tea seem fine for most people. The real important thing is to try to avoid adding, sugar or honey to them. If you really like your tea and coffee sweet, have some stevia instead. That'll be better and won't spike your glucose.
I have an really interesting question that's just come in. Do different carbs affect your glucose control? I find bread and pasta can raise my blood glucose levels. I imagine this is someone who's monitoring themselves. But for some reason, if I eat out and indulge in a pudding, this can have a negligible effect on my glucose control. And in fact, from what you've said earlier, I think I probably know what the answer is to that.
Go ahead.
Well, it's because you're eating the sweet food after you've had the savoury food, and therefore, yeah. So I've answered the question. I've learned something.
Yes.
um, BG again has asked, can you suggest a range of low sugar snack foods other than fruit and vegetables?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially any sort of protein under the sun. So any, tofu, egg, cheese, meat, fish, etc., any protein stuff. Anything that has fat in it. So, dairy is awesome. Cheese is great. If you find avocados, that's also wonderful. And
Well,
then,
avocados are like the wonder food, aren't they? They're the best thing, avocados.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
great. And in terms of fruit and vegetables, any vegetable under the sun is also great. For fruit, be a little cautious because the fruit that we have today in our supermarkets has nothing to do with the fruit that nature intended. The fruit we see
Mhm.
today in supermarkets have been bred for millennia to be extra sweet and extra juicy. So they should be, treated with a bit of caution. For example, grapes are this human invention of these little sugar bombs and can spike your glucose levels quite
Yeah.
high. So, I mean, whole fruit is still totally fine as a snack and there's really no problem, but you can think about adding some clothing to your whole fruit, notably, a bit of peanut butter, a little slice of cheese, or some nuts with it will do wonders.
I have a question actually. With this
Yeah.
big fad for sourdough that there's been, and I live in a part of London where there's sourdough everywhere. Is sourdough any better
Yes,
from
it
a
is.
glucose spike point of view?
It actually is because during the fermentation process, a lot of the starch gets fermented, and so you see a much smaller glucose spike from sourdough bread. Yep, it's a very good
So that's
option.
really interesting. I wasn't
Yeah,
sure if it
other
was
good
just
option. It's great. Other good option for bread are any sort of dark rye bread or pumpernickel, anything with a lot of seeds. That's definitely a better option than having like very white bread.
and Colin here is asking about the use of sweeteners, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not having
Yeah,
sugar in your coffee, does it make any difference if you're like popping one of those little?
huge difference. Huge difference. So a lot of us believe that sweeteners are really bad and worse for us than natural table sugar, but that's not true at all. So sweeteners such as stevia, monk fruit, allulose, erythritol, those are really good options. They don't spike our glucose levels. They are better for us than traditional sugar. Yes, sweeteners have side effects. They may increase cravings, they may affect the microbiome for sure, but traditional sugar does that on a much bigger level. So the side
That's it.
effects of these sweeteners is still tiny compared to the side effect of real sugar. So that's really, really important for people to remember.
And fruit sugars. I mean, I'm never quite sure about fruit in the role of, um, a diet in the widest sense of the word, because sometimes sometimes fruit is seen as not necessarily a valuable option. Although, I mean, where do you stand on fructose and how those sugars are in the
Yeah.
hierarchy?
So the way I like to put it is if you want to eat something sweet, a piece of whole fruit is the best thing to choose. That being said, fruit is, as I mentioned, have been bred for a very long time to be super sweet. So they're really optimized for pleasure. You don't need to eat fruit in a healthy diet, but whole fruit is still fine if you want
So
something
you
sweet.
say that you
No,
don't need to eat fruit in a healthy diet. That's
no,
it.
no, no, no. You do not. No, no, no. All the vitamins and minerals you find in fruit are also found in vegetables, and they don't come with like this big package of sugar in them. So another
Right.
important point is that while whole fruit is still fine, the
Mhm.
problem arises when you denature a piece of fruit. When you juice it, when you dry it, when you blend it, you remove the protective fiber in the piece of whole fruit, or you render it less effective and you concentrate the sugar. At that point, it's just sugar. So if you take a orange juice, that is the sugar from an orange that's just been concentrated into a liquid, no fiber. And you take a can
Mhm.
of Coca-Cola. A can of Coca-Cola is all the sugar from a beetroot that's been concentrated and put into liquid form. A can of Coca-Cola is beetroot juice.
Is it?
Yeah. Where do you
I
think the
didn't know
sugar comes from
that.
in soda? Yeah.
I had
It's
no idea.
it's either beet or corn or cane, which are also plants.
Oh,
It's the
how interesting.
same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing. So I never drink fruit juice. And I
Wow.
recommend people completely stop drinking fruit juice because it's
Mhm.
literally like having in a can of Coke. There's so much sugar in there. It spikes your
That's
glucose level so high.
That's a really thought-provoking thing to end on. So I'm going to switch to whole milk. I'm not sure I'm going to be giving up my bananas quite yet, but
No, you don't have to. No,
so
take
no,
them.
no, really, that was super interesting. I really learned a lot. I hope everybody else did as well. So I just want to say thank you, Jessie. That was amazing. Thank you,
Thanks for
everyone, for
having me,
watching.
Miranda.
So thank you, Jessie. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Miranda.
Great. Have a good evening. I think it's a bit cooler this evening, so hopefully we'll all be sleeping better.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.